Welcome back to lesson 4. This week, no doubt you will have had a look at last week's exercises and had a go at them. This week, the answer sheets will be on. And when you mark them, you may look at the word away and maybe you've written it in an incorrect way. Let me have a look at that word, away. If, when you did that exercise, you included the Y, you're forgiven. However, we're going to look today at Y in a word. And there are 3 things to consider when we look at Y in a word. And in this particular one, Y is silent. So that's number 1. Y is silent. So when we say away, the last sound is the A. I know I keep telling you that Teeline isn't phonetic, but there are some exceptions, and all the exceptions come in that concrete that we're building at the beginning of the theory. So let's get rid of the Y because it's too long, the outline will be. So that's a silent letter. We need that initial A, we need the W of course, and we need the final A. So your outline should look like this, A, W, A. Down where possible, up where necessary. And I showed you last week how when a letter dips, such as W or a V, then the indicator A would have to go upwards. If it didn't, you'd have A, W, A, and that would just look like way when you write at speed. It would just look like a wobbly W. So that one is not the best outline, that one is. So first of all then, when Y is silent, there's lots of instances when Y is silent at the end of a word. Words like bay, say, lay, etc. You can think of many others. Second one is when Y says Y. In words like boy, joy, enjoy, royal. Now if you notice, I'm emphasising those words because if you're unsure, when you say bay, say, lay, the lips go back. When you say boy and joy, the lips come forward. So if your lips come forward, you've got a y sound. So boy then would be written B and Y. Toy would be written T and Y because the lips come forward when you say that word. And the third one is when Y says I. Now last lesson we did the indicators and you'll remember that the I indicator slopes in this direction, that one. So when Y says I, we use the I. Again, the Y is too long to write. So let's take a word like buy. It's got a Y in the spelling, but it's silent, buy. So we do the B and the I. If this is making you sigh, have a go at that one. S and I, because of course the GH are silent letters. So S, I do clockwise, anti-clockwise, and then the I. You might have gone clockwise and then the I. Both are correct. But we read from top to bottom, left to right. So the S goes at the top and then the I. If you're doing this, if you did the S first and then the I, you may read that back as is, because if we're reading from top to bottom, we read the I first and then the S. So top to bottom, left to right when we're transcribing. So those 3 things need to be considered then. When Y is silent, when Y says y, and when Y says I, using that I indicator. Let's look at some more examples where Y comes at the end of a word and says I. Remember that saying that I gave you last time, which is down where possible, up where necessary. And I demonstrated it in the word away. So let's take a word, and there's loads of them, like many, many, sunny, happy, funny. All those words have a Y at the end, and the Y doesn't say E, happy. It's a short sound of I. So happy, family, funny, sunny, I. So it's the I sound. So many then would be men, MN, and I. Now if I come down with the I, that could look at speed like a G. So down where possible, but in this case up where necessary to give this nice sharp angle. So sunny then, S inside the curve of the N, the Y says I, up where necessary. Again, if we came downwards it might look like SG. Happy, so we start with the H on the line, and then the P, and then the I. And finally funny. We could do this two ways. We could use the upward F, the N and the I, or you could use the downward F before the N and the I. My preference is the downward F before an N because it's so fast. Look, oh, this is where we get our thrills, where we're going all one motion instead of F, stop, N. So I prefer that one, but either one is correct. So when you consider that Y says I, think about these. Usually at the end of a word we'll go upwards because it's necessary. So we just looked at Y in a word. Now we're going to look at L in a word. Don't worry, there's not loads of these. These are the two awkward people in the Teeline family. So L, when it comes in a word. Now, so far we've met two forms of L. We've met the loopy L, loopy Lenny, and we've met the bracketed L, curvy Lucy. So there's two members of the Teeline family. Now we're going to meet the third member of the Teeline family, still an L in part of the L family, but it's going to be the upward L. Now you never write upward L on its own. It's always as part of a word. But what does it look like? Well, if we think of a clock face, it starts on the line and it's that quarter of the circle. So it goes upwards in that direction. As I say, never be written on its own, always as part of a word. So when do we use the upward L then? Well, we use it for a word like gull, because gull starts with a tail letter or a letter that comes through the line. So if we're already starting through the line and then we're adding the L, it's dodging it on the next line when we come to write. So it makes the shorthand easier to read and easier to write if we can keep it closer to the line of writing, and the L would go in an upwards direction. Now if you forget and you do it like that, it's not going to be the end of the world, but you will get used to this upward L after a tail letter. So let's imagine that that word was gulp, G-U-L-P. Now let's have a look to see what the effect would be if we got the L downwards. G, followed by the downward L, followed by the P. Oh dear, we're taking up 3 lines. Doesn't look good at all. So now that's a clearer indication of why we need that upward L after a tail letter. So G, the L goes upwards to keep the shorthand closer to the line of writing. The P comes through the line. So let's think of another tail letter then where the L would go upwards. Let's take the word pull. So the P, and then that's gone through the line, so the L would go upwards, pull. Now last week I told you about T's and D's being disjoined after an R. If you remember, the R until now has been the only upstroke. R was unique, it was the only one that was written in an upwards direction, but now we've got 2 strokes that are written in an upwards direction. So the same thing applies as it did to the R when it comes to T's and D's. Do you remember I said that we make a difference with write and read? That D doesn't go on the line because it's part of the word, so putting it low makes it still part of the word, but there's a difference between the T, which is on the T line and like an umbrella, and D, which is written halfway through. So we've got write and read. So now we have P, L, and if I wanted to add a T to make it say the word polite, then the T would be disjoined like an umbrella. What would happen if I forgot that disjoined T? Wouldn't be the end of the world, but my outline would look like this, P, L, and then T. When you're writing at 100 words a minute in an exam, you might just think that's an extra long L. So you need to have that T disjoined because it does 2 things. It tells you that there's another letter there, and it also tells you what that letter is. Because of course, if I'd done the letter low, like so, halfway down, it wouldn't say PLT, it would say PLT. D. So that would say pulled, for example. So that's what we need to think about when we're writing L. 3 forms now: the curly L, the curved L, and the upward L. Now let's just go back momentarily to that upward L. We say that we use it after a tail letter. There are 3 more instances where we are recommended to use the upward L. And those are after an H, after an M, and after an N. So let's have a look why that might be. So if I do an upward L after H, that would say hell. If I use the downward L, it would still be okay. I can see where the H ends and the L begins. But again, if I wanted to write help, I've come down for 3 depths and I'm well into the next line. So by putting the L upwards after an H and then just letting that P just extend below the line a little bit, I've got a better outline because it's closer to the line of writing. So that then would say hell, that would say help. This one isn't quite such a good outline. After the M, so if I do an M and then the upward L, it's a nice sharp angle. We get something like the word male or mull or any combination of ML. If I use the downward L, I put the lazy teenager on the line, that's still fine, but not as good for the reasons that I've stated. And if I put the lazy teenager upstairs and the L there, that might be a little bit better. But so that we don't have to make these sorts of decisions, let's do the L upwards after an N. And similarly then upwards after an N. So N and L, so null. It was null and void. So let's add an extra letter and let's do N, L, T, and that would say knelt perhaps. M, L, D, that could say mailed. And H, L, D, that could say HLD, held. If it was a T, it might say halt. If it was a T and a D, it might say halted. A little bit more elaboration on those T's and D's. If I wrote this outline, see if you could read it back. A indicator. Now, a number of students will say attended when they've considered it for a little bit. Can't be attended because there's no N in it. So what we know we've got is an A indicator. We know that that first consonant is a T because it's on the T line. We know the second one is a T because it's a little bit higher. And we know the last one is a D because it's a little bit lower. So we could have, if we filled it in, a word like attitude. So practice these T's and D's after the upward L and also after each other. We're now going to move on to common words. This is so that we can extend the dictation and make it more interesting for you. And we can't do that unless you know the common words. So last week, if you remember, we showed you how to write the word for because it occurs so often that not being able to do an FR blend was going to hamper us when we write the dictation. And just as a reminder, we did the loop of the F and the R, didn't we, like so. Common words that are not in quite such common use as for are ever, and we use an E indicator on its own for ever. We also make that every. The centre of the sentence will tell you which it is. And then begin and derivatives of that word. You know, I showed you last week that B and G don't like one another. B and N don't like one another. So we retained the medial vowel to join them together. So in full, begin would be B, E, G and N. Well, we're going to get rid of all that. We're just going to leave the N hanging below the line. There are not many things in T-line that are actually below the line, but those that are need to touch the line. One of them is the special outline for evident or evidence. And now we've got this, which can say begin, begun or began. So not as common as for, but nevertheless very relevant. And I think that we can now go on to do some more of the more common words. So today I'm going to show you some more common words, and they are related to the theory I've just taught to you. So if we look at the word on, for example, it starts with a vowel that's sounded and it's followed by an N. So if I was to write that, or you were to write that now with the knowledge that you have, you would do the O, the baby isn't on the floor, and the N, the teenager. Now, that is starting in an anti-clockwise direction and continuing in a clockwise direction. It's a bit like a drunken driver. They don't know where they're going. And so at speed, we don't want you changing direction necessarily in the middle of an outline. So we're going to decapitate that N. I know it sounds a bit violent, but we're going to get rid of that one. So we're going to do the O and just that part of the N, and that's going to say on. Now, there are not many of these, but it's one to learn. And if we add an I indicator where the Y says I, you can probably guess that that's going to say not ony, but only. Because again, another common word that we need to write in its shortest possible time way. There are lots of words where we kick the L out of them. So words that end in ly, and just so that you can remember it, we kick the L out of them. Now, I used to be able to get my leg a lot higher than that, but that's as best as I can go. So kick the L out of words that end in ly. Not always, but a good 90% of the time. So there's only. Made a note of some other ones. The word that, Rose showed you that last week. TH like the, and cross the T through it to make that. Another one is they. Write it there, they. Now, this is strange, isn't it? Because the Y is silent because we don't put the lips forward, but there's an E there, but we say a, they. So we're going to, again, use that phonetic emphasis, and we're going to do the A indicator instead of the E. So we're going to do T, H, and A. And we're going upwards for the sharp angle, because if we came with the downwards indicator for A, again, we've got this wide angle, which at speed can make it very difficult to transcribe. So that's the word they. Now, occasionally you will see they written like this with the E indicator going across. It's much easier when we're joining words on to do the A indicator going upwards. So you might have then a phrase that they had. So they had. Look what happens if I do they had. It's all higgledy-piggledy. So again, that's not so good. So using that A indicator going upwards. Now we're going to come on to joining words together. And this is where it starts to get exciting. I've examined those foundations. They're almost set. We're ready to build. Now, once we start joining words together, we're really building speed. So we have one outline, or squiggle, as I like to call it, which represents at least 2 words, possibly more. You remember in the very first lesson, I gave you a snippet of how exciting this can be by showing you the word all and then closing it up to make all over the world. And the fact we know it's over because it's an O, as in over, and this is pictorial representation. In other words, it looks like the globe. So we can do all sorts of things like that. However, let's start simple with words that come together all the time. So we'll start with it and is. Now, that was in the dictation last time, and we did it like this. I indicator T, I indicator S. And we congratulated ourselves if we got those indicators in the correct direction, because they're complicated at first. So now if we're going to join those two together, usually, not always, but usually when we're joining two things together, a little piece goes missing. And you may guess that it's that indicator. So it becomes this, it is. So that is also the grouping for it has. because if I wrote it separately, it would be it, and then H sloped the way the A goes, remember, and has. So when we join those together, that goes missing. So it is and it has is exactly the same outline, but the sentence will tell us which it is. If you don't believe me, it will come to light as we progress. So now let's do another simple one. Let's do it was. So we'd always put the first word in its original position, so IT for it and WS for was. Remembering to put that S inside the curve, it was. And now let's add the word a. So we could, it was a. So one outline, 3 words. Practice them and drill them. And that way, when you meet them in dictation, it's like going at 3 times the speed, or almost 3 times the speed, because it takes you so much longer to do the it on the T line, the was on the line, and then lift the pen and put another A. It's almost quadrupling your speed. So important. We showed you as soon as possible as well. We did as pos. And so we've missed lots out of that, because if we wrote that all separately, it would be as soon as pos. We didn't bother about the ibble. Joining all that together then, we've only got the AS and the PS, and all that bit in the middle goes. It's magic, isn't it, T-line? It's really magic. So let's have a look at other word groups. I'm going to go up here. So I will. Now we don't put babies on the floor, but I, when it means me or I, is a word in its own right. It's no longer a baby like an indicator. It becomes something in its own right. So I put the I in its correct position if it was on its own, and then the will joined on. However, if you wish to put it, if you wish to put it there, up there on the T line, and then join the will on, it would still be correct. And now I'm going to add the word be. So the word be on its own, of course, is just a be. Now when I add that to this, I'm going to get rid of this, because if that was a magnetic shape, that is going to go on top of that, and then it's just the be to join on. So I will be. Now if I want to say I will be able to, we're going some here, aren't we now? I will be able to. You remember the full A on its own says able or able to. So whereas if you wrote it on its own, the able or able to would be on the line. When it's part of a group, put it where the last bit ends and close to it, so that your hand's not moving around on the page too much. So now you've got I will be able to. Let's see how many times we can write I will be able to in 10 seconds. I've got the watch. Have a go. Ready? Go. Stop. Right, count up how many times you've written I will be able to. That's 5 words. I bet you've been able to do it at least 6 times. 30. And 6 10 seconds in a minute. So that's 180 words per minute. And obviously if you've done it more than 6 times, then that's going to go up, that speed's going to go up. Can you see how important it is to know these common words, to be able to join them together with confidence? Because it's the common words that is the key to the speed. So if you've only got limited practice time, concentrate on those common words and those word groupings.
There was such a lot to take in there. Now let's see if you can recall those words or other words that relate to the theory that's just been taught. Now at any time, do pause the video, have time to think. Okay, ready? Say, lay, delay, jail, decay. Now let's check those back. So say we've got S and the A indicator, lay, L and A, indicator. Hopefully you agree that the curly L works better. Delay, so D-L-A indicator. Jail. Now I want upwards L after a tail letter, so upwards L after a J. And decay. So D, C, and A indicator. Next group, are we ready? Ever, begin, on, only, they. Let's check those back. So do you remember ever? The E indicator also representing every as well. Begin, N below the line, again can say begin, began or begun. On, we made a sharp outline by chopping off the hump of the N, so on. Only, we've kicked the L out of that word. Looks like oni, that wouldn't be a word, so we know this is only, one to practice. And finally we had they. And we're going up with that A indicator for they. Okay, next group, let's go. She would, they would, they have, I will be able to. Let's check those back. So did you chop the wood in she would? Did you chop the wood in they would? And again, that revises the word they also. They have. So we've got they, we've added on have. Or we can do T followed by the H and the V, so you can lose this indicator if you so wish. Again, both are correct. I will be able to. You've got to love that one. So I will be, remember the stick of the L is doing two jobs, and disjoint A for able to. That could also say I will be able. Again, we would know in terms of context and the sense of the sentence. Final group, let's go. After, afterwards, we have been, guilt, guilty, jury. Let's check those back. So after should take you back to lesson 1. Remember, a full A for after. Then building on that, we had afterwards. So we've got A for after, then using the would rule and the S inside the curve afterwards. We have been, so W for we, V for have, and then B. Remember, you can use the full B, however this one is shorter. Guilt. If you've done G, upwards L, disjoint T, that is perfect. Then making that guilty, we have G, upwards L, T, I, guilty. And finally we have jury, so J, R, I, jury. Now because guilty and jury are used commonly in court passages or court cases, we've got an even shorter option for you to use. So guilty can be just GI and jury just JI. So again, these are both correct. Taking it one step further to build speed, we've got guilty and jury. So shortly, we're going to move on to some dictation that builds on all the theory that we have done today. I do want to introduce you to two special outlines before we start. We have different and we have difficult. So different, we have D, downwards F, and we disjoin the T on top. Next we have difficult. So we have D, downwards F, and C. Now we could build on that outline to make difficulty, thinking what we would do with that L and that Y will become I, difficulty. So do press pause, drill these over and over again, and then you'll be ready for the dictation. I'm now going to read a series of sentences. Now don't panic, we will pause after each one and we'll check the outlines on the board. Okay, ready? So here's the first sentence. He was guilty of the attack. So H for he, S inside the curve for was. Guilty, that's a special outline. So you can do the full way or you can just do GI, either is correct. Of the, and we've lost the T of the attack. A indicator, T, and then C. Next sentence. He was found guilty by the jury. So he was found, downwards F and D, then you can do the upwards version, whichever you prefer. Guilty, special outline. Did you join by the together? Jury, J-I or J-R-I. Next one, ready? He said he deserved to be found guilty. So said, you want S and D. So we have he said he deserved, D, S inside the angles, B, R, D, to be found guilty. Now, if I was in your position, I would have definitely stumbled on deserved. It's quite a long outline, quite tricky, but the more you practice, the more fluent you'll become. You've got options for to be, option 1, option 2, and hopefully you remembered guilty as well. Okay, next sentence. Now this starts with the phrase, I will be able to. So get a nice head start by trying to join that together. Again, you might pause it and try and give that a go first. Okay, ready? I will be able to visit him every week when he goes away. You'll notice that I read I will be able to fast. So I will be, disjoint A for able to. It's a wonderful grouping. Visit, so VST. Him, H and M. Every, I hope you remembered that one, E indicator. Week, W and K. When, WHN. He goes, so G and S for goes, and then away, which we've looked at already, AWA. Okay, next one, ready? He served his time. So he, SRVD, his. Did you slope the H to go direction of the I indicator in his? Time is T and M, or you can put an M in the T position. His time. So he saves his time. A short one, but again, you may have stumbled upon this word and you might want to just check that your his is sloping the right way. Otherwise, it would say has. Next sentence, are you ready? I'm going to give you a hint here. It starts with afterwards. Again, you might pause and think, what did that look like? Okay, chop the wood is a hint here. Okay, ready? Afterwards, he said he would be different. So full A for after and then woods. He said he would be different. We've only just learnt that one. So D downwards F, T on top. And again, you'll notice we put the B here for would be rather than putting it separate. So just working on those groupings. Final sentence, only a short one, so let's try and get something for every word. Ready? He gave me his word. So H for he, gave, M for me, his, sloped for the I indicator, and then word, the W underneath. He gave me his word. We now have a series of 50 words we've just gone through. Now take the time to make your choices. There's always going to be choices in Teeline. So for example, are you going to use guilty, this version or this version? Think about the options with things like to be. Did you need to practice words such as deserved, S outside angles? Same case with visit. I know these are things that would have definitely tripped me up as well, possibly served as well. So make a note, take some time out before we give this a go. And we're going to have now a series of 50 words read out at 60 words per minute. So it is a challenge. So grab your pads, let's do it. Ready? He was guilty of the attack. He was found guilty by the jury. He said he deserved to be found guilty. I will be able to visit him every week when he goes away. He served his time. Afterwards, he said he would be different. He gave me his word. Remember, your transcription time is 10 words per minute. So press pause, you'll have 5 minutes to transcribe your notes, and then you can check them back. We're now going to stretch the best. I'm going to read out half a minute at 100 words per minute. You've got a choice here. You might choose to trace your outlines that you've just taken down to reinforce the knowledge, or you might try to set yourself that wonderful challenge of taking it down fresh at 100. Now, even if you only get 1 or 2 sentences, that's a massive achievement for today. Let's give it a go and grab your notepad. Okay, ready? He was guilty of the attack. He was found guilty by the jury. He said he deserved to be found guilty. I will be able to visit him every week when he goes away. He served his time. Afterwards, he said he would be different. He gave me his word. Now, to end this lesson, I'm going to read out a series of 50 words, which is brand new dictation. So we've not gone through it beforehand, which does make it quite difficult. So grab your pads, let's give it a go. Ready? There was an appeal. The court case lasted for most of the day. It could have gone on for many weeks. It was lucky that it ended so quickly. It was a very difficult time. I would like to say it was a very difficult time for all of them. So press pause, you've got 5 minutes to transcribe. Let's check the outlines back. Sentence 1, there was an appeal. So there was an, can be joined together, appeal, AP, upwards, L. The court case lasted for most of the day. So disjoin T after R, S inside curves. Now if you look here, we've joined most of the together. That does work really well, and disjoin D4 day. Most of the day. It could have gone on for many weeks. Join it could have. Remember on. FR for 4. Many, MNI. And weeks, WKS. It was lucky that it ended so quickly. It was can be joined. That it can be joined. Just check ended, you've got your E indicator. Quickly, we have kicked the L out of that word, quickly. It was a very difficult time. So it was, it can be joined. B for very, difficult, new special outline, and time. The last sentence, a long one. We have I would like to say. Hopefully you got I would correct. Now to advance that further, we have the K for like, I would like, and we've got rid of the T for to in to say. So it looks like I would like say. However, you would know what that was when you transcribed. So I would like to say it was a, group together, very difficult time for all of them. And hopefully you remembered your O indicator for of. So quite a lot to master there. Many things for you to take note of and drill. But remember, don't get worried, don't get stressed. Let's love Teeline together.